My name is Louisa Swain, and I was born in Norfolk, Virginia in about 1800 or 1801. There's records weren't too good then, but my dad was, my folks, I was born into a Quaker family, and my dad was a sea captain, and I don't know, I just don't remember him at all. He was gone most of the time, and then when I was about 7 years old, he went out on a voyage and didn't come back. So the ship just got lost at sea. So my mom decided to move back to South Carolina, where she was raised, because she had some relatives back there. And so we moved down there, and then she died when I was 10, and the relatives just couldn't take me in. They just had too many kids. And so I went to the Charleston orphanage house, and I was there until I came of age, and I worked for two different families. I watched kids, I washed floors, I washed clothes, I cooked, just whatever had to be done. And then when I came of age, I found an uncle that lived up in Baltimore, and he said I could come up there and be with him. And so I went up there, and that's where I met my Stephen. And he had his own chair factory. He manufactured chairs there on the East Coast. And so we got married, and we had four children, and 3 boys and 1 girl. And eventually we moved to Ohio, Western Ohio, and he continued to make chairs and stuff there. And then we moved into Indiana. We were just kind of moving west really slow. And then when we moved there first, my youngest was only 6 months old. So, it was not an easy trip. If you can imagine in a wagon with one that was that age. But then all the kids kind of scattered, and my one son, Arthur, went clear out to Laramie, Wyoming in about 1868 or 69. I don't know if he went part of the way in a wagon and then he got on the train. I don't know for sure. But he had a grocery store, and then eventually the banker at one of the banks in Laramie found out that he was really good with books and stuff, and so they hired him at the bank. And so and he was married, and he asked us to come out, and so we came out in 1869, and then they had my grandson. Oh, he was so cute. And my husband wasn't working then. We were just out here staying, but we lived over here in Wayland's boarding house over here where the old Carnegie Library was. And I one morning was headed downtown to get some yeast for the lady of the house, and they said, well, you should go vote while you're down there. So I went in and I voted. But of course, at that time there was just Democrats on the slate, and there was just one running for each office. So you just wrote yes, and that was it, and you dropped it in the box, and that was it. So some stories that some of the ladies in town talked me into being the first one to vote, so that and then they would go down. And so Mrs. Boyce, she was the second one. She came about a half hour later, and she voted. And then some of the other ladies came, and so I don't really know for sure how many of us voted that day, but that was the day. And so then I think the altitude was bothering my husband, because he just wasn't in very good health while we were here. And it's just so much higher here than it is on the East Coast. And so we moved back to my daughter's house, and she lived in Lutherville, Maryland, and so we lived with her, and Stephen passed away about 2 years after we moved back there, and then I lived for another 7 or 8 years. I didn't die until 1880, and I'm buried in the Friends burial ground in Bedford, Massachusetts. And there just was a lot going on at the time, and of course I didn't know that they said I was the first woman. They made a big deal out of it, but it was in the papers and everything. But there was a lady over in Utah that was voted before I did. But there was some controversy with the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate, and they were kind of fighting with the Mormons. And so they decided that something wasn't handled quite right, and so they nullified her vote. So that made me the first woman to vote in the country, and I got voted with all the rights that any man that was walking down the street that day had, and in New Jersey in 1807, they used to let women vote. They didn't get to vote on everything, but they got to vote on some things. But then the legislature decided that women couldn't vote anymore. So in 1807, they took the right to vote away from women, and so it was until 1870 that women got to vote again. And here it was in the territorial legislature and stuff that because we weren't a state until 1890, and then it was a whole nother 50 years before they let all the women in the United States vote. It was 1920 before they let women vote. And right after that same spring after I voted, there were 6 women in town that got seated on the jury, and along with 11 men. And Judge
How
was the judge, and he was a big believer in women's suffrage, and so he said those men just weren't acting like decent citizens the last time he had a jury, and so he wanted to put some women on there. And so Mrs. Boyce, she had some kids of her own, and she had 3 boys that were just ornery kids. But she just took them by the ear and just, you're going to do what I tell you to do. And so they decided that she'd be a good one to be the first bailiff. So she was the first woman bailiff in the United States. And her duty was to sit out in a chair outside of the rooms at the hotel where they put the men and the women on the jury, just to make sure that there wasn't any shenanigans going on, and those men left them women alone. Yep. And women served on another jury for Judge Howell, and then another judge came into the picture, and he wasn't a suffrage person at all. And so he said, no, there's not going to be any women on my jury. And so it was 1924 before there was another woman in Wyoming on a jury.
Wow.
Oh, they just kind of got rights, and then they didn't get right. Men still had control, but there were a lot of men that were on the side of women. It wasn't everybody was on this side and women were on the other side. Like sometimes that's what happened back east. They really got a lot of problems back there when they started the suffrage movement. But I was the first one. They just made such a big deal about it. I just, all I did was make an X and then went home with the yeast. That's it. That's how it went.